You tell a younger coworker to just push through a rough week instead of taking a mental health day, and their face changes. Not annoyed, hurt. You watch someone 20 years younger look at you like you said something cruel, and you have no idea what you did wrong. Here's what nobody tells Gen X. You grew up on a set of rules nobody ever wrote down. Nobody explained them to you. You picked them up from empty houses after school, from parents working 2 jobs, from a decade that taught you to handle things on your own. Now you work and live next to 2 generations raised on the opposite rules, and neither side realizes this isn't a personality clash, it's 2 different sets of expectations operating at the same time, and nobody ever compared notes. Today we're going through 7 of these unspoken rules, the ones you follow without even thinking about them, and the reason each one causes real hurt when a millennial or Gen Z person runs into it. Stick around, because Rule 7 is the one that ties all the others together, and it's probably the one running in the background of more arguments than you realize. By the end, you'll know exactly why you keep getting these confused reactions from younger people, and it has almost nothing to do with you being cold or outdated. Start with where these rules came from. Gen X, born between 1965 and 1980, grew up as the first generation of latchkey kids at scale. Divorce rates roughly doubled between 1965 and 1980, and dual-income households became far more common. That meant millions of Gen X kids came home to an empty house after school most days. You made your own snack, did your own homework, and solved your own problems because there was nobody around to ask. Psychologists like Jean Twenge, who has spent decades studying generational differences, point to this pattern as one root of what's called an internal locus of control, the belief that solving your own problems is your job and nobody else's. That belief got reinforced through your 20s and 30s by 2 recessions and a job market that punished anyone who looked like they needed help. By the time you were raising kids of your own or mentoring your first employees, this way of operating wasn't a preference. It was simply how you understood the world to work. Millennials and Gen Z grew up differently. Parenting shifted toward closer supervision and emotional validation starting in the 1990s. Schools added social-emotional learning to the curriculum, and therapy moved from something private into something people discuss openly and often. 2 generations were raised to name their feelings out loud and to expect support when they did. So when your instincts collide with theirs, it isn't a values problem. It's 2 different upbringings producing 2 different sets of unspoken rules. Here's the first one. Rule 1. You don't complain, you just handle it. If something is broken, hard, or unfair, your instinct is to fix it quietly and move on. You don't post about it, you don't bring it up at a meeting unless you have a solution ready, and you don't expect anyone to check in on you about it. Complaining without offering a fix feels weak to you. To a millennial or Gen Z coworker, this reads completely differently. They were raised to believe that naming a problem out loud is the first healthy step toward solving it. Staying quiet about a struggle looks like suppression to them, not strength. So when you tell someone to push through instead of talking about what's bothering them, they don't hear practical advice, they hear dismissal. Pew Research Center surveys on workplace attitudes have found that younger employees are more likely to describe open discussion of stress and workload as a sign of a healthy team, while older employees are more likely to see the same behavior as unprofessional. Same conversation, 2 opposite readings. This is the rule that causes the most friction in offices right now, but it isn't the deepest one. There's a version of the same instinct that shows up at home with the people closest to you, and it's the one that confuses your own kids the most. Rule 2. Silence means nothing's wrong. You don't need constant reassurance from the people in your life. If your partner or your kid hasn't said anything is wrong, you assume things are fine, and you extend them the same courtesy. You don't check in every few hours. You don't ask if you're okay after a normal disagreement. Silence, to you, is neutral. It just means life is moving along as usual. To someone raised in the 2000s or later, silence often means the opposite. Attachment research has shown that people raised with more inconsistent caregiving tend to interpret quiet as a warning sign rather than a neutral state. And the last 15 years of therapy-informed culture have trained a generation to check in often as a form of emotional safety.
So when you go quiet after a disagreement with your adult child or a younger partner, thinking you're giving them space, they might sit there convinced something is seriously wrong. You think you're being respectful, they think you're upset and refusing to say so.
That gap alone explains a large share of family arguments that start with, "Why didn't you just say something?" But there's a third rule underneath this one, and it might be the single biggest source of tension between Gen X managers and their Gen Z employees. Rule 3. Your personal life stays out of work. You keep a clear line between your job and your home life. Coworkers don't hear about your divorce, your kids' struggles, or your health issues unless you choose to share it, and even then, only in small pieces. Work is where you perform a role. Home is where you're a full person. That separation felt like basic professionalism to you, and it also felt protective. You watched people damage their standing at work by sharing too much, and you learned to be careful. Gen Z employees, more than any generation before them, expect the opposite. Deloitte's annual survey of Gen Z and millennial workers has repeatedly found that authenticity and openness from leadership rank among the top things they want from a job, sometimes above salary. To them, a manager who never shares anything personal doesn't read as professional, it reads as untrustworthy or cold. So while you think you're being appropriate by keeping your struggles private, a Gen Z employee might quietly decide they can't trust you because you've never let them see you as a full person. That single misunderstanding has ended more manager-employee relationships than most companies realize. The next rule takes that same instinct toward privacy and applies it somewhere even more sensitive: your money. Rule 4. You don't talk about what you make, what you spend, or what you owe. Money is private. You'd rather talk about almost anything else at a dinner table than your salary, your mortgage, or your debt. This isn't shame, it's simply how you were raised to treat money, as something you handle quietly and never discuss outside your own household. Millennials and Gen Z broke that rule on purpose, for a reason that makes sense once you hear it. Wage transparency became a tool against pay discrimination, and social media turned money discussion into a form of financial education that older generations never had access to. To them, staying quiet about salary isn't discretion, it's a habit that keeps people underpaid and uninformed. So when you deflect a question about what you earn, or tell your adult kid you'd rather not discuss the details of a loan you're helping with, they don't experience that as privacy. They experience it as one more sign that you're keeping them at a distance. Here's where it gets more personal, because the next rule isn't about money or work at all. It's about how you show love, and it might be the most misunderstood rule on this entire list. Rule 5. Showing up is how you say, "I love you." You express care through action. You fix the leaking faucet. You drive 4 hours to help someone move. You show up at every game even when you're exhausted. Saying the words out loud, often and directly, never felt necessary to you because the actions were supposed to make the point on their own. Younger generations were raised in a culture that puts a high value on verbal affirmation. Therapy-informed parenting over the last 2 decades pushed hard on naming emotions directly, telling kids, "I love you and I'm proud of you" as a regular spoken practice rather than an implied one. So when you show love through action but rarely say the words, a Gen Z kid or partner can genuinely feel unloved, even while you're doing everything you can to take care of them. You show love one way, they recognize it a different way. Neither one is wrong, but without the words added to the actions, real hurt can build up on both sides.
This next rule sounds small on the surface, but it might explain more Gen X and Gen Z conflict than any other one on this list, and it starts with something as simple as a ringing phone. Rule 6. If it's urgent, you call, you don't text. When something actually matters, your instinct is to pick up the phone. Texting feels appropriate for logistics and quick facts, not for anything with real weight behind it. If your kid doesn't answer a call, you call again, because in your mind, that's what you do when something's important. To a Gen Z person, an unexpected phone call often causes real anxiety before they even answer it. Pew Research Center's studies on teen and young adult communication habits have found that most young people prefer texting over calling for nearly every kind of conversation, including serious ones. A phone call to them feels sudden and demands an immediate reaction they didn't have time to prepare for. So when you call twice in a row because you're worried, what feels like normal concern to you can feel like pressure to them. You're trying to reach them the fastest way you know. They're experiencing it as sudden and overwhelming. That brings us to the 7th and final rule, the one that ties every rule on this list together because it's really about what you believe respect is supposed to look like. Rule 7. Respect is earned through experience, not given by default. You believe that time in the field, years on the job, and lived experience carry real weight. You didn't expect your opinion to matter as much as a supervisor's when you were 25, and you don't automatically extend that same weight to a 25-year-old now, no matter how confident they sound. Millennials and Gen Z were raised in a culture that pushed against hierarchy for its own sake. Flatter workplace structures, participation-based classrooms, and social media platforms that give a 19-year-old the same size audience as a 50-year-old all taught them that a good idea should stand on its own, not on who is saying it or how long they've been around. So when you say something like, "wait your turn," even if you never use those exact words, younger coworkers and family members can sense the assumption behind your reaction. To them, that assumption feels dismissive rather than wise. And once you notice that pattern, you start seeing it behind almost every other rule on this list, too. None of these 7 rules make Gen X wrong, and none of them make Millennials or Gen Z wrong either. They're 2 different sets of expectations, shaped by 2 different decades, and both made sense for the world that produced them. Your rules kept you steady during a childhood with less supervision and an economy that punished asking for help. Their rules were built for a world that finally started taking mental health seriously and tried to correct decades of silence. The friction isn't proof that one generation raised its kids right and the other one didn't. It's proof that nobody ever sat either side down and explained the rules the other one was quietly living by. Once you can see your own instincts as a product of your specific history instead of universal common sense, the confused reactions from younger people start making a lot more sense, and so does the way forward. You don't have to abandon the rules that got you here. You just have to explain your reasoning to the people standing in front of you. If this helped you understand your own instincts a little better, or explained a reaction you've been confused by for years, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you're still here, drop a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear this. See you in the next video.